Hi, and welcome to our lesson on Egypt, focusing on looking at hieroglyphics. What we're going to do today is have a quick review of the work that we've done so far. Hopefully you can see the screen that I've shared with you on ancient Egypt. We'll quickly recap through that, and then we're going to be having a look at some of the hieroglyphics that we've been looking at, and looking at the different sounds and seeing what sounds we know and identifying which words we can think of with those sounds in them. So getting started. So hopefully you can see our first page there. We've got the pyramids in the background. We've got some boats, and obviously all of this water. Can you remember what this is? The name of this big river? Very important in Egypt. It was the river, that's right, the River Nile. And we've talked a lot about that during lessons, and that will come up as we go through here. So I'm quickly going to move through some of these pictures here. We talked a lot about last week, particularly, where Egypt is. Hopefully you can remember which country, which continent Egypt's in. Begins with an A. Africa. Africa is right. And it's right at the top of Africa, almost towards Europe. And we looked at why Egypt, which was such a big civilization, started around there. And one of the reasons was because it had the advantage of having a really long river called the Nile River. And in class, we looked at what the reasons were that made the Nile so important to the people that were living there at the time. And if you can remember from some of the pictures, alongside the banks of the Nile, there were lots of trees and plants and vegetables and lots of farms. And that's because obviously the water from the river enabled things to grow. And the further that we get away from the river, the less things that grow. And it becomes more desert and more sand, which obviously isn't too useful for growing plants. Other things that we talked about, can you think of anything else that the Nile was used for? We talked about them in class quite a bit, and some of you had some really good suggestions. So looking at the river, important things you came up with were things like fish, so for food, meat, things like that. The Nile was also used for washing clothes, washing people, for water, for drinking water as well, for giving water to the animals that were being farmed as well. So cows in the region, that type of thing as well. So lots and lots of reasons why the Nile was so important and why it helped people to live in what otherwise would have been quite a difficult environment to live in. Okay, there we go. We've looked last week at the pyramids, and we can see them right down here towards Cairo. And there's the Nile River, and you can see it gets very big. We did talk a little bit about the different seasons and how the Nile each year at certain points floods, which means that it spreads out above its banks and can take some of the nutrients from the river to the surrounding areas, which makes them fertile, which means that grasses and trees and crops can grow in those, whereas otherwise they wouldn't. And moving on down, so lots and lots and lots of information that we went through about the Nile, about how long it was and about the different animals that lived there, and that if it wasn't for the Nile, people would be really struggling to live in places like this. All that sand and those sand dunes, very difficult, which is why camels were so important to the people that were living there at the time in terms of a mode of transport and to take things along. We did last week also look at gods and goddesses in Egypt, different religions, and that a lot of the people believed that each of the gods were responsible for certain areas of the world, and that's how they explained phenomenon that they couldn't really otherwise understand through science. So they had gods in charge of the sun, in charge of the underworld, and even gods in charge of the Nile. And if you remember from last week as well, when we were talking about pharaohs, the pharaohs were seen as living gods. They weren't just the king or the queen, they had special powers. And that moved us on to our writing, which is what we're going to be focusing on during this lesson. And to do the writing, the ancient Egyptians used hieroglyphics. And these were a system of pictures that enable people to pass on information to each other. So if we look here, we can see that these are some of the pictures that they used instead of letters, and you can see the letters underneath them. Now, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out the sound that each of the letters makes, because you can see, for example, at the top here, we've got 3 different pictures, and they all have A underneath them. So it can be quite difficult to figure out, well, what A sound is it? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Which pictures made which sounds? And we're going to see if we can have a look at coming up with ideas for ourselves. So what I'm going to do is stop there for a second and move on to, I'm going to share a different page with you that will hopefully enable me to do that for you. So I'm just going to go back into sharing, and I'm going to be sharing my application window. So that should work. So hopefully you can see a picture there of some hieroglyphics. And the first one we've got is the ah sound. So remember from the slide that I just showed you, there were 3 different pictures which had a type of an ah sound in it. So the sound for this bird, this was a short ah sound. So that was the sound that we see in, can you read this word? So we've got k, ah, t. And if we try to blend that, it's cat, cat. So it's the short sound ah. I wonder, can you think of any other short ah sounds? So we've got cat. What if we change that k to a b? Bat. So cat, bat, hat, sat. So the short ah sound is the sound that we get when we have the picture of the bird. If we move down, we can see that this picture, which looks like an arm, is the long A sound. So the sound where the A is an actual A sound, and that can be made either with an A followed by an E at the end, so the magic E, which makes that an A sound rather than a sound, or where we have an A and an I put together, so like in here. And both of those make the long A sound. So this word, ba, a, k, bake, or p, a, oh, pale. So we've got bake and pale. We could also have shake, lake, make, or pale is what we have here. We could also have sail, tail, or male. So just to recap, the short a, so a, 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 a. So we're going to have a look at 2 more. When we see this picture, this is our B sound, as in bat, or bread. What words can you think of that start with B? Do you know anybody whose name starts with a B? Because if they were going to write their name would start with this picture. So B, at, bat. So B. And the last one we're going to have a look at today is this picture here. So when we see this picture, the ancient Egyptians used this picture to represent the sound of a soft C. So S, which is similar to the S sound that we can see. S. So that works as in mice. We could also have ice if we got rid of the M, or dice. So our soft C sound, soft S, which also sounds like our letter S. So S, and that's the sound that we make when we see this shape. A and A. So those are our 4 sounds for today. A, B. And can you remember? That's right, the soft C sound. So the mice sound. So those were our sounds today. Those were the phonic sounds that go with the hieroglyphics, and our recap of the lessons that we did last week. Later on in the week, we'll do another phonics hieroglyphics session, and we'll concentrate on the next 4 sounds. Okay, thanks very much. See you next time.